Hello, I'm Miss Libby Rose. I'm a fashion design specialist and sewing teacher, and today we're going to learn how to make a seam bow. Step one, we need to look at what we need. So we need 2 pieces of fabric for the actual bow, approximately 30 centimetres by 15. It's just approximately, but around that. But if you want yours bigger or smaller, you can add or minus there. Then a smaller piece of contrasting fabric. This is for the centre of the bow, and that can be about 15 centimetres by 5. Now it's really good if we can use recycled fabrics here. For one, it saves you money and it's good for the environment. So if you've got lots of scrap fabrics left over, just have a rummage and see whether you can find some pieces around this size. That's a good thing to use. So then we'll need some pins, some hand sewing needles so we can sew it onto the clip, and some tailor's chalk. And then you'll also need your thread and your sewing machine. Step 2 is we get our fabric pieces ready for sewing. So in order to do that, we put our big pieces of fabric with the right sides together. So when we say right sides together, we mean the good side of the fabric, or the fabric that we want to see on the outside when it's finished. So we put our right sides together, put them in place like that. Then we get our pins and we pin all the way around our sewing line, and we place our pins perpendicular to our sewing line, so with the heads as far away from our sewing line as possible. This means that we can sew along without taking the pins out. We can keep that nice and flat. So we pin the whole way around, and then once we've pinned and this is just for you really to feel secure when you're sewing around, so you can use as many or as little pins as you feel comfortable with. But what we want to do is leave a gap in the bottom here. Now we want to keep that exactly in the middle, so if you fold that in half, you can see our middle point. We want to leave a gap of, let's say, about 5 centimetres gap. So I'm going to leave a chalk mark here so I can remember that I have to leave a gap in the bottom. I've left my tailor's chalk. Pin all the way around. So that's my main piece pinned. And then this is for the centre of the bow. So I'm just going to fold it in half, and my sewing line is along this raw edge. So again, I'm going to put my pins perpendicular to that sewing edge, put a few in there, and I'm ready to sew. Okay, now we're ready to sew. Once you get to your sewing machine, we take the small skinny piece of fabric and we line it up on the machine. Now the seam allowance here is we're just going to use the edge of our foot as a guide. So that's about 0.5 seam allowance. But if you just watch the edge of your foot against the edge of the fabric, that's quite a good seam allowance to leave. Now fabric colour doesn't matter, because this stitching is not going to be seen, it's all on the inside. So first of all, we start with a backward stitch, and then we go straight forward, just keeping that sewing line the edge of the fabric line. Then we end with another backwards, and we're done. We take our large piece of fabric. I think it's good to start at the chalk mark so that we know we're going to start and finish at chalk marks, so we remember to keep a gap there. So again, we're going to use the edge of our foot as a guide. That's about 0.5 seam allowance again. Go backwards a few just to lock the stitch, and then forwards. Once we get to the edge, we slow down, needle down, lift and turn. Now we're going straight, again keeping our foot at the edge of the fabric. flow down towards the edge, needle in, up and turn again. Needle in, lift, turn. And now we're coming to the chalk line, so we're going to slow down and then do a reverse stitch, and then we come out, trim off our thread, and we've got our large part sewn in. Now we've done the main part of our sewing, we come back to the cutting table, we take our pins out, whole way around, and then we want to, if we trim off the edges on the large part of the bow, now this, if you trim nice and close, minding not to cut the stitching, if you trim nice and close here, you'll give yourself a nice crisp edge. And then you're ready to turn the bow through. And then use a sharp object like the edge of your scissors and poke your edges out to get a nice sharp edge. Now that we've turned both pieces of fabric through, we want to put some pins in where our little gap is at the bottom here. So let's pop some pins there. And at this stage you could also press the centre part flat, but it's not necessary. But if you'd like to, you could do that at this stage. And then we go back to the sewing machine to finish off. So now we're back at the sewing machine. We want to top stitch over the little gap that we've made to turn through. So I'm just going to sew as close as I can to the edge. You won't really see it, and if I can get as close in as I can, then we won't notice that at all. So a little bit of back stitch. So by pinching it in at the middle, our midpoint, that's quite a good bow. And then we wrap our centre point, the small piece of fabric around. You can pull that as tight as you can so we get a nice bow middle there. Now we simply do a stitch along this piece here to hold it in place. You won't see this because it's at the back, so just get in there as close as we can. Some back stitch. Stitch that up nice and tight. Then we have our bow made. And now for the final stage, we want to attach our bow to our clip. So I'm going to simply use a glue gun for this. You can use fabric glue or you can hand sew it on to the clip. So just put a dollop of glue on the back. And then simply stick our clip on the back. And these little edges can just get trimmed off then. And that's how we make a seam bow. You could use all sorts of fabrics. Instead of using the little piece of fabric like we did, you could use a buckle instead, and that would be just threading the bow through a buckle in the middle. Or you could use some sequin fabric just to make it stand out a bit more. And you could do all sorts of shapes. We've done some large ones here.